Alright, I am back with another build, and today we've got an archer build, because I haven't really done one in a long time. The last one I can remember is the Holy Arrow Remastered, which was quite a long time ago at this point, and I wanted to give another one a crack. Now, this build is kinda simple. I think it's something that a lot of people would have thought of doing, but I wanted to put my own sort of spin and twist on it just to see if I could change things up a little bit, and the build that I ended up coming up with was really cool. Originally, I just wanted a 1-level dip into fighter and 11 levels of assassin rogue, just so you could go for a big Nova damage round at the start of combat, going for as many sneak attacks and critical hits as possible, starting off the combat hidden, getting in a sneak attack, and then getting in another one as you gain your action and bonus action back at the start of combat, you know, etc, etc, going for the highest amount of sneak attack damage possible. And while I think that build is still good, I've included it as an alternate option in the description, the build I've decided to go for today is slightly more inspired by Marvel's Hawkeye. Not entirely taking all the inspiration from it, but I did like the idea of having an archer character who can do a lot of different things with, let's just say, various ammo types to kind of work the battlefield, like basically have battlefield control, assist their allies in certain ways, while also being able to do massive amounts of damage, because at the end of the day, archer builds in BG3 are kinda busted. But overall I thought it was a pretty cool idea. This build can obviously make use of the various arrow types that can be crafted through alchemy and such like that if you want to. However, I mainly wanted to get like special bow and arrow moves, which we could use to, you know, make a powerful build that way, with a lot of battlefield control and overall manipulation of what enemies can do. And I think this build really does succeed. I mean, it's stupidly strong, has a high amount of mobility, and is just rather fun to play. It kind of lets you pick and choose how you want to deal with certain enemies, and again, the options that you have available to you are going to feel pretty potent as you go throughout the game. Now, I'm just going to say this now, the actual build itself isn't the most creative of all time. The leveling scheme does look pretty obvious with hindsight, but I think with the equipment that's been chosen, as well as kind of how the character is played through feat choices as well, I do think that this build is going to feel pretty fun and unique. And I think it's actually a great build for perhaps someone who is slightly newer to BG3, maybe they've seen the patch 8 hype and have started to get into the game, could actually benefit a lot from. I'm not calling this a beginner build like I've done in the past, but I do think this build does have a lot going for it, which people can take advantage of. Also, it's 100% vanilla, no mods other than the cosmetics here. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. I decided to play as a tiefling for this one, pretty much just because I like the aesthetic here, but if I was actually going to play this build 100% optimally, I would play a gnome, getting advantage on a bunch of saving throws because that will come in handy. But otherwise, we're going to have fire resistance and dark vision, and because we are a Mephistopheles tiefling, god that's a word, we're going to get mage hand, which I actually did kind of want for this build, almost giving us an arcane trickster vibe, since mage hand is kind of that whole thing, without actually playing an arcane trickster. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But first up, we are going to be kicking things off as a rogue. You could start this build as a fighter as well, but I like starting off rogue because it's going to give us all of the weapon and armor proficiencies we need for this build, as well as more skill proficiencies and expertise, so I do think it is the stronger start for this build. That's going to get a sneak attack, allowing to add extra damage to our ranged and melee attacks. We will have the option to melee with this build, but ranged is definitely what we're going to be striving for, and it's as long as we have advantage against the target. We're also going to gain a few, we're also going to be able to set up our abilities at this level, and of course, we've got a pretty standard rogue spread, although there is a little bit of weirdness here. Strength is at 12. Normally I tend to dump builds that are dexterity focused. I don't like to use strength on those builds mainly, but in this build it does make sense, because with strength we'll actually have a higher jumping distance, and I want this build to be mobile, so I think strength does make sense. Now of course you could dump it and do what I've done with a lot of archer builds in the past, and use the Club of Hill Giant strength and just never really use your melee weapons and just get a free 19 strength, but I did actually have other melee weapons in mind for this build, so I've not gone for that here, hence the 12 strength. If you want to build it like my other archers, then you can dump strength and use the Club of Hill Giant strength instead, and just focus on using your bow, and you'll basically never see it anyway. But dexterity is at 17 because obviously it's our main attacking stat, and we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Constitution is at 16 to give us a decent pool of HP, intelligence is at 8 because we don't need it, wisdom is at 12 because I like to have it for the saving throws, and because because of the stat point allocation that we do have an awkward 9 in charisma. It is a bit of a wasted point. Feel free to change this up if you like, but this is about as optimal as we're going to get for this build. Moving on to skill proficiencies, we have a lot, and it's kind of up to you what you want to pick here. I've gone with the urchin background for sleight of hand and stealth because of course, and I've gone for expertise in those two things. But I've also chosen athletics because I do want us to be able to have, you know, a bit of a higher, you know, resistance to being shoved. The game's automatically selected acrobatics, but we are going to change that. I've also gone with investigation and perception because I feel like a Hawkeye-inspired character, you know, who's a very good archer, would be able to notice small details and have a kind of general sense of their environment, so I feel like those two make sense. And then finally, we can spend that last one on whatever we like. I would say, let's go for intimidation, because I feel like that makes sense here. Now, I would say at this point, I'm going to want to start building up our fighter abilities now, because yes, our primary class for this build is actually fighter. So we're going to start doing that now and start getting what this build is really about. We can come back to the rogue stuff a bit later. So moving on to fighter, we're going to gain access to second wind, which we're going to be taking a decent amount of fighter levels in this build. So getting that extra bit of healing is actually going to be nice. But of course, we do also get our fighting style. Now, if you have the fighting style expanded mod like I have, you do have a few more options. But really, we're going to be going for archery to get that +2 bonus to ranged weapon attack rolls. Because of course, this build eventually does grab Sharpshooter, and we want to be able to take advantage of that. Moving on to fighter level 2, we're going to get Action Surge, which feels amazing on this build. We're going to have one of the strongest opening rounds I've ever had in a build, and Action Surge is part of that. You're going to be able to make an attack from a sneak attack, gain a couple more attacks, and then Action Surge to gain even more attacks from that. So, I mean, you will have seen in the combat footage from the start, we can do a lot of attacks on our opening round of combat, so Action Surge is going to feel really, really powerful here. Also, we get Burning Hands. Not really relevant. Let's move on. At level 3 of fighter, we get to choose our subclass, and of course, we're going to be going with Battle Master for this build. Now, if you wanted to experiment with the Sharpshooter subclass from 5e fighter subclasses combined by some Dragnoth, you absolutely can. I think it's got some unique advantages that could give you some fun abilities throughout the game. However, I do want to use Battle Master today because, again, we grab the maneuvers. Maneuvers are basically a way to augment your attacks to have unique effects and allow them to deal a little bit of extra damage at the cost of a unique resource, that being the, let's have a look, the superiority die. That's what it was called. Don't know how I managed to forget. And as you can see, we have a lot of things to choose from. Now, not all of these will work with ranged attacks, but a lot of them will, and some just have some general utility. However, my favourite maneuver to go for on a ranged Battlemaster build is Goading Attack. You deal an additional 1d8 damage and attempt to goad the target into attacking you. The target will receive disadvantage on attack rolls against anyone but you. So if you're doing this to a melee character who doesn't have a ranged option to hit you with, they are forced to attack anyone nearby them with disadvantage or waste their turn trying to get as close to you as possible. And since we're going to be sniping from rooftops and such and from very far distances with this build, that means that you're basically going to be shutting down melee-based enemies with just a single attack type, which is very, very good. But what if you're dealing with a ranged enemy who can give you a bit of trouble? Well, that's where Disarming Attack comes into play. Obviously, this works on anyone who wielding a weapon, but it's particularly fun to use on ranged characters, because you're going to be able to knock the weapons out of their hand. So if they're holding their crossbow or bow and arrow or whatever they have, you can just say, nope, you now have to spend your time picking that up next turn, meaning that you're less likely to get shot, which is very, very good. And finally, one of my favourite maneuvers for a build like this is Trip Attack. Being able to knock an enemy prone at any point is just great, dealing an additional 1d8 of damage, and knocking the target prone is always going to feel pretty damn fun. And of course, knocking an enemy prone means that you and all of your allies get to attack with advantage, and they have to spend their movement to stand up, meaning that again, if it's a melee character, they have a lot less of a chance of reaching you. These three are probably going to be the core of your moveset, but we will have the opportunity to grab more later, and I'll discuss them as the build goes on. Moving on to fighter level 4, we're total level 5, meaning that we actually do get Flame Blade, but again, not really relevant to this build. We are going to be able to pick up our first feat of the build though. Now I would say around level 5 you're probably still in Act 1, and as you all know, Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master builds do tend to use the Risky Ring. We do use the Risky Ring in this playthrough. Now, here's the thing though, that's obtained at the start of Act 2, meaning that in Act 1 you might not have it yet, which would mean taking Sharpshooter right away might be slightly less reliable. So we're actually going to go ahead and grab Athlete at this point. This is going to allow us to round up our dexterity, which is great, but it also allows us to increase our jump distance by 50%. This is going to give us a huge amount of the mobility that we need to be able to get around the battlefield and get to optimal sniping positions. And if enemies come after us, boom, we spring away and can continue the combo of just jumping away, shooting, jumping away, shooting, and there's not much your enemies can do about it. Obviously, because we're playing a fighter, we're going to be able to get our next feat very soon, so you don't have to worry about waiting for Sharpshooter, it's going to come pretty quick. Now, I said in the previous video, like, my kind of expected level ranges for these builds, and some people coming back with, like, how are you leaving Act 1 before you're level 6? Like, how are you skipping so much content? And I'm just like, repeat playthroughs, man. Repeat playthroughs. But anyways, this is a pretty solid feat to start off with, so I recommend it. Moving on to fighter level 5, we get extra attack. Obviously, a massive damage boost for us. And at fighter level 6, we get to pick up that feat, and surprise, surprise, we're taking Sharpshooter. This is going to allow us to deal an additional 10 damage with all of our ranged attacks with a -5 penalty to our attack rolls, and we no longer have to deal with the high ground rules, which is just such a great quality of life feature. Now, obviously, that penalty is a problem, but with the aforementioned Risky Ring plus the archery fighting style, you're pretty much never going to have to deal with that penalty ever. I mean, obviously, you would have seen in the combat footage, I still had like a 96% chance to hit, even with, you know, this penalty, so it's really a non-factor. It's free. It's an extra 10 damage on all of our shots for free. Snack this with our Battlemaster maneuvers, giving us even more damage on our attacks. And yeah, this gets pretty powerful pretty quickly, and we're inflicting different effects on top of it, like disarming or knocking enemies prone. This does a lot for us, so we're going to pick it up here. Now that we have hit level 7 of fighter though, let's jump back to Rogue. Rogue at level 2 is going to give us the ability to dash and disengage as well as hide as a bonus action. These are all great. Being able to get even more mobility to be able to get where we need to go by dashing is amazing, as well as disengaging. If melee enemies do somehow get next to us, we can just disengage and move away, and it's going to make it so we can snipe them from afar without having to worry about opportunity attacks. And of course, hiding to guarantee that sneak attack is a good thing as well. At Rogue level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and honestly, I think I've slept on this subclass so much. I think most people in this case would choose Thief, and also use dual crossbows as a result, but honestly, go with Assassin. Assassin was probably my least used subclass for Rogue for the longest time, at least according to the statistic video from way back when, and now if I've really played with Assassin on more builds, it is just so fun. These level 3 features add so much, so let's talk about how they affect this build. First up, Assassinate Initiative. You are the deadliest against unprepared enemies, and in combat, you gain advantage on attack rolls against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. So, you can open up combat with surprise, you don't even need the Risky Ring, you just get advantage on everything, but we still do use the Risky Ring, and I'll get into why later. But we also get Assassinate Ambush. Any successful attack rolls against a surprise creature is automatically a critical hit. That is going to be very important later. Not only does that mean max sneak attack damage as well as a high amount of damage on our maneuver that we could use for an opening attack, we also get a bit of an extra bump from our equipment. Again, I'll explain when we get to that section. And finally, Assassin's Alacrity. Quick as an alley cat in a rain dark city, you immediately restore an action and a bonus action at the start of combat. So let me paint this picture for you. We're going to open combat with a Seek attack, starting a surprise round, getting a guaranteed critical hit. The enemy is now surprised. We now have our action and bonus action back, meaning that now we can attack twice with extra attack, meaning that we get to hit 2 more people for critical hits. Then we get to Action Surge, hitting 2 more people for guaranteed critical hits. Now we only get our sneak attack once or twice, depending on if the game registers the combat starting properly and blah, 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 blah. But that's still a lot of extra damage. If we wanted to just dump all of our maneuvers into doing extra damage on all of that, you're probably killing all of the encounter's minions, or just beating down a boss to half or maybe even death, completely just 0 HP. Like, you've got a lot to work with here. You can go for a massive opening Nova round, or be a bit more conservative with your resources, but still spread a lot of damage around the battlefield. This is an amazing combination with Battlemaster, or just Fighter in general, that I never considered. I really need to play with Assassin more. I think it's got a lot of potential. But anyways, let's move on. At Rogue Level 4, we do get another feat, and at this point, we've got an interesting choice. Because we've gone with the Battlemaster route, we can actually grab where is it? Martial Adept. There it is. Martial Adept is going to give us another superiority die, which we wouldn't normally have access to, as well as 2 more maneuvers. Well, again, we have a few choices here. I really like Pushing Attack. Pushing Attack is going to allow us to spend a superiority die to make an attack that deals the additional damage, but could also push a target back 4.5 meters. I just love the idea of pulling the arrow back so hard and firing it with such force from the recoil that it just pushes an enemy and knocks them off their feet. That feels amazing, and of course if that enemy happens to be near a cliff, well, that's very beneficial for us. We can also pick up Precision Attack here, which isn't quite like the other ones. You can spend a superiority die to add the result to an attack roll. If you're really dead set against using the risky ring for the risk, then this can really help you, giving you a massive bump to your attack roll if you need it. I just picked this up as a utility option for whenever it might come up. Perhaps something cancels out your advantage and you really need to make sure this attack lands. This is a safety net, and since a lot of these other ones don't work with ranged attacks, this is just a nice thing to have in your back pocket for the rare use case where it will come up. Now we get to leave Rogue and go back to Fighter, giving us another superiority die and even more maneuvers. So let's have a look. First up, for our 2 new maneuvers that we get, we're going to grab Menacing Attack. I mean, I feel like if there's a sniper in the shadows, taking out all of your guys just as you're trying to figure out what the hell's going on, you're going to be pretty frightened. This will allow you to possibly frighten our targets, making it so they have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls and be unable to move. So, obviously, a pretty debilitating status effect, and that extra damage is always nice. Also, we get to choose another one, and this one I would say is kind of up to your preference. If you do have people up in your face, you can go for a post, which will allow you to use your reaction to immediately attack them again. You can go for maneuvering attack if you want to make it so your allies can move after you make your attacks, which could be very, very interesting. Fainting attack seems like an obvious choice, but it doesn't work with ranged attacks, unfortunately, only melee attacks, which does make sense. Evasive footwork could give you a bit of extra, kind of defense if you want to make it so enemies have disadvantage to hit you, but I don't feel like that comes up enough in this build. Our whole goal is to use our maneuverability to stay out of attack range more often than just trying to dodge when we are in range, so I don't feel like this works as well. This leaves you with a few other options. Unfortunately, sweeping attack is also melee, so you can't use that. You could go for rally if you want to give your allies 8 temporary hit points, which is okay. There's also distracting strike, which allows you to distract a target, giving your allies advantage on their next attack roll against the target. Honestly, just use trip attack, because most of the time, if you're knocking an enemy prone, your allies are going to be able to just attack them with advantage anyway. As well as Commander Strike, in which you can instruct an ally to make an additional weapon attack, which could also be pretty good. Honestly, it's entirely up to you. I like Maneuvering Attack the most because it still does that extra bit of damage, works with our ranged attacks, and allows us to give our allies a bit of extra movement, so I'll go with that, but honestly, it's a pick your favourite situation. And then at Fighter level 8, we do have access to 1 more feat. Now, you can max out your dexterity here, which would probably be a good idea. You could also bump up your con, whatever. However, I actually got a lot of usage out of the mobile feat here. Your movement speed increases, and difficult terrain does not slow you down when you dash. Obviously, now we can't be trapped in difficult terrain, meaning that we're always going to be able to get where we need to go. And after you make a melee attack, you don't provoke opportunity attacks from your target. So, what you could do with this then, if say someone is up in your face and you don't want to disengage as a bonus action, maybe you want to jump away, you can smack them with your melee weapon, which you will still be able to use quite effectively here because they're finesse weapons and we have dex. So that means that they won't be able to make opportunity attacks against you, meaning you can jump away for free and then snipe them with your extra attack for massive damage. I think it just adds a lot more to this build, and you can feel free to take this earlier if you want, but I do think as a nice capstone it just gives you that extra bit of maneuverability that makes you just feel like a speedster, which I think really works, and it just does add utility to the build. Obviously, you could just max out your dex and get a little bit more chance to hit and damage, but overall our damage is already really solid, and so is our chance to hit when all is said and done, so I feel like mobile just adds that little bit extra that makes the build just come together. Speaking of the build coming together, that is the build, and the camera's fighting me. There we go, let's go with that. So, what you're going to get out of this build is a ton of damage. You're going to have a decent amount of sneak attack damage. Of course, you could go for more rogue levels if you want that to increase, but getting an extra 2d6 is still pretty nice. And of course, all of our maneuvers are just going to have a bunch of extra damage tacked onto them. But as you can see, disarming attack range there is doing a plus 18 with an additional 1d8 plus an additional 2. That's not including sneak attack damage. Yeah, you know, you can do some pretty stupid damage with this build. You have a ton of maneuverability and an ability to put yourself anywhere on the battlefield and get yourself out of pretty much any situation. You can disarm enemies, you can trip them up, you can make it so that they're forced to attack you even though they can't reach you. You know, you've got a lot of different things that you can do with this build that feel great. You've got a decent chunk of healing with things like Second Wind, and you've got one of the biggest opening damage rounds on any build I've ever done, thanks to Assassin and Action Surge. So overall, this thing is an absolute powerhouse. You are going to feel like a deadly bow and arrow sniper a la Legolas, a la Hawkeye when you use this build. So I know what people are going to say in the comments. Oh, you made a Hawkeye build that is, you know, based on killing. That's just Ronin. Yeah, it is. But of course, as I said, this build is pretty simple. So let's look at how the equipment helps this build function. Now, some of this stuff is pretty standard, but I do have some unique options available to you. But let's look at the melee weapons. Our first melee weapon is the Knife of the Undermountain King. This is just going to make it so that we roll a critical hit on a 19 or higher. And when you roll 2 or less damage on a damage die, you can re-roll that die, taking the highest result. With all the attacks that we're going to be doing, that just means a ton of extra damage, as well as the fact that we're going to be attacking with advantage all the time. Having that little bit of a bump to our critical hit chance suddenly gets a lot bigger when you're rolling 2 die at once. So critical hits are going to be a big thing even outside of our Assassin Initiative round. However, we're going to combine this with our 2 other main weapons, the Dollar Amorous Dagger and the Vicious Shortbow, which both have the exact same effect of Dollar Amorous. When you land a critical hit with a weapon or unarmed attack, it deals an additional 7 damage. Now the Dagger version and the Shortbow version stack, meaning that with every critical hit, which you're going to get quite a lot on this build, obviously, that's an additional 14 damage on top of sneak attack, on top of whatever maneuver you wanted to do, on top of Sharpshooter. Yes, this is stupid. This is a one-shot in a bottle. You are just going to be able to use these features all together, get that critical hit at the start of combat, and people are just kind of going to die. And of course, you're still going to be powerful after the effect, and again, you have all this battlefield control. You're just going to feel like an absolute menace on the battlefield. But let's discuss the rest of it. Your early game bow option is the Titan String Bow, and this weapon deals additional damage equal to your strength modifier. Now, technically, this actually adds a +1 damage even if you have a negative strength modifier, so that's fine. And obviously, we have 12 here, which is still going to be that +1 anyway. However, of course, if you decide to go with the Club of Hill Giant Strength, this will do more damage, or potions, or whatever. So really, this can technically out-damage this combo, maybe in some situations. I still like the Vicious and Dollar Amorous... Dollar Amorous... Though? Figure your shit out. I'm keeping that in the video. Obviously, this might be able to out-damage this combo in some situations, but I just like the idea of going for, like, Deadeye crits even more and getting that extra bonus because of it. But I guess technically the Titan String Bow may be able to put out more consistent damage with that strength modifier. I don't know, you'll have to play around with it, but that's up to you. That's a whole different build. I like what we're going for here. So, the Titan String Bow, obviously an option, but I do like this combo, so we're going to go with that. Moving on though, but again, this is like your early game option though, I would say. This can be your early game option regardless. Anyways, moving on. Our headpiece for today is Savarok's Horned Helmet. You gain Dark Vision if you don't already have it. The number you need to roll a critical hit while attacking is reduced by 1. This effect can stack, so now we critical hit on an 18 or higher. We're rolling 2 die every time, we're critting a lot more often. You also can't be frightened or affected with other emotion-altering conditions. That's just a nice thing. We inflict fear, we don't feel it. But as an early game option, you can go for the Marksmanship Hat, giving you a +1 bonus to ranged attack rolls, which can help offset that Great Weapon Master's Sharpshooter penalty. I'm slowly losing my mind. We also have the Shade Slayer Cloak. While hiding, you get that critical hit reduction again, meaning that if we're hiding, we now roll a critical hit on a 17 or higher, meaning that that opening shot especially is way more likely to get a critical hit, but if we're able to hide as a bonus action on our turn, we now have a consistent way to get even more critical hits as well. It just fits right at home on this build. For our armor, I've gone for the Elegant Studded Leather, giving us a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, which is great for helping us get a head start in combat if we don't manage to get our assassin round. Although even so, we do want to move higher in the turn order after our assassin round, so yeah, this is still pretty good. But it's also going to give us advantage on stealth checks, meaning that we're able to hide a lot easier. Again, if you play as a deep gnome though, you're going to get this built into your racial kit, so you can actually swap out this armor for something else. Now I know what you guys are thinking, you're playing an assassin character, this should be a Dark Urge using the Dark Urge armor, the ballist armor to get that vulnerability to piercing, but of course, that only works at close range. We're not playing at close range here. And if you don't want to play a gnome, which a lot of people don't, this is still a good way to get advantage on those stealth checks. And in the off chance you are going to take a stray shot from an enemy sniper, you've got shield as well once per short rest to bump up that AC. 18 is perfectly good for what we're doing here, but sometimes bumping that up to a 23 feels pretty good. But of course, this is a late game option. In the early game, pick up the Spider Silk Armor from Munthara to give you a little bit of a bonus to your stealth and advantage on Constitution saving throw checks. We're not really using any concentration stuff in this build, so that last part's whatever, but this is a solid early game armor that you can pick up that looks quite good on the character, and hey, any bonus to stealth with a rogue is quite nice, but you can get a bit more creative if you're willing to go more out of your way for some of the other armor options, but this will do you just fine. In the late game, you can pick up the Legacy of the Masters for your gloves, giving you a +2 bonus to attack and damage rolls with weapons. Obviously, this is just more flat damage with all of our attacks, as well as offsetting that Sharpshooter penalty even more. We've pretty much entirely negated it at this point, in fact, to the point where it's almost overkill. However, in the early game, you can pick up the Gloves of Archery, which will allow you to do 2 additional damage with all ranged attacks. So basically, for us, the Legacy of the Masters is just a bit of an upgrade in the late game, but you could even keep the Gloves of Archery if you want to slap the Legacy of the Masters on someone else. Another option available to you, though, in the late game is the Gauntlets of the War Master, giving you a +1 to attack rolls, as well as making it so targets have disadvantage on saving throws against your maneuvers and weapon actions, meaning that all of these maneuvers that we picked up from Battlemaster will have an increased chance of going through with their secondary effects, because they're all saving throws, so if you really want to go more into the battlefield control side of things, and really make your enemies have a bad day, you can go for the Gauntlets of the War Master instead, but otherwise the Legacy of the Masters is a solid pick. Now this last one's a fun one. We've got the Speedy Light Feat. If you find that enemies aren't really trying to reach you, you have an extra bonus action on your turn all of the time, and even if you do need to get out of the way, you're probably going to be dashing with your bonus action quite a bit. So the Speedy Light Feat allows you to, whenever you dash, you gain 3 lightning charges. Lightning charges, while you have them, will give you a +1 bonus to attack rolls and give you an extra 1 lightning damage, basically turning any attack you do into a +1 attack with a bit of extra lightning to it, which is really good. Again, helps offset that Sharpshooter penalty, and since this is obtained in the early game, that helps a lot if you decide to take Sharpshooter early. But of course, that extra 1 damage on everything that we do does stack up, and once we gain 5 charges, which is 2 dashes, you'll be able to deal an additional 1d8 lightning damage on the attack. So this build is now kind of a funny little speedster as well, getting that extra bit of lightning in addition. Now, of course, you could also use the Line Breaker boots here, which would also help with damage in a different way, but I liked the idea of the Speedy Light Feat a bit more on this build, just thematically, so I decided to go with it. For our necklace here, really this is a throwaway slot, but I really liked the Corvid token here. While wearing this amulet, your jump distance is increased by a little bit, as well as the fact that you gain permanent feather fall, meaning that now you can jump all over the battlefield without caring where you land because you're not going to take damage, which is great. Also, you gain the ability to polymorph into a dire raven, which, again, for the theme of this build, just being this shadowy sniper that deals massive damage and then flies away as a bird, feels very cool, so I decided that this is a fun thing to have for utility as well as flavour. Moving on, for this ring, we have the caustic band. Total throwaway slot, but again, for all the attacks that we're doing, an extra 2 flat damage of any kind on all of those attacks is going to stack up into something pretty damn big, but again, feel free to flourish something else here if you want. And of course, the risky ring, guaranteeing advantage on every single attack that we do, meaning that we always have sneak attack, no matter the situation. However, it comes with the fact that we will receive disadvantage on saving throws. Now, of course, if you play the rogue game right, if you're hiding properly, if you're maneuvering properly, and of course we do have many different ways of getting like a higher attack roll with things like precision attack, as well as obviously our opening round with assassin is going to be guaranteed crits and with advantage, so that doesn't matter. You may actually feel like you don't need the risky ring, so if you really want to play around not needing the risky ring, but you can change this out for something else and not have those disadvantage on saving throws, meaning that you'll have a bit more freedom. But I think for most people who just want to click button and see big damage number, then the risky ring is going to do you just fine. We're very unlikely to be subject to saving throws as long as we maintain our distance, so as long as you play this build right, the risky ring's disadvantage shouldn't really be an issue. But again, those who really want to play the proper rogue kind of playstyle of stealthing and moving and hiding every turn, then of course you don't need the risky ring if you play that right. But this can save a lot of people who want a more chill and casual playthrough some headaches. So I still recommend the risky ring, however, you can play around it if you want. As for the cosmetics, it's just the basic armor here. However, I am using the Faerunian Colors mod for the mask dye, just to give us this kind of brownish black feel, which just looks absolutely awesome. But yeah, that is the build, and what can I say? Not the craziest in terms of actual build making, but I feel like the equipment, the theme, and just the general vibe of the build was enough to make a video on. Some of you may disagree. I don't know. I really like this kind of idea. I love this ability for battlefield control. But again, if you don't care about that so much and just want big damage number, then drop all the fighter stuff except for 1 level and go the rest assassin, still gaining 3 feats, as well as the ability to do even more damage with your sneak attack for a big single shot sniper round. But I do think this just adds so much to the build with the battlefield maneuvers. The opening around with assassin and action surge just feels absolutely amazing to execute because, well, you're gonna be executing people because this build does a lot of damage, and that's kind of the point. Hey, I like to power build too sometimes. But overall, I've not really got much else to say. The build kind of speaks for itself in a lot of ways, so I won't hold you for too long. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.